What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another edition of Mets Prospective Live. No guest this time. It's just me and Joe DeMayo. Excited to be back as we flip the calendar to September, and obviously the New York Mets very much in the thick of the NL postseason chase, and some minor league topics to talk about as well. So that's why we're here to touch on a lot of different topics. Brettbaity, Marc Vientos, Francisco Alvarez. We'll get into it all. Joe, first of all, how you doing? And let's talk about these Metsies, especially after a very exciting win last night, Timmy Trumpet and all.
Everything's going great, Jacob. And yeah, exciting game last night. It truly felt like I was watching a playoff game, maybe a preview of the NLCS, who knows? But it's definitely a clash of two big time teams. And looking forward to today's game because the Mets and Dodgers so far have split the season series. So whoever wins today's game wins the season series, which will be a good kind of feather in the cap for hopefully the Mets.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable how evenly matched these two teams are. I mean, when you think about the Dodgers and just their track record over the last, you know, close to a decade of how dominant they've been in the National League, it's easy to kind of look up at them as the dominant force and that they're just that much better than the Mets. But when you look at it, and especially how they've played, they've been pretty evenly matched down to the pitching and the lineups and the bullpen especially.
Very competitive series. And, the Dodgers right now, the record dictates they are the class of the National League. But I don't think they are, a step and a half ahead of the Mets. And especially if we're talking a playoff series, I know we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here, but if you're talking a future playoff series, I mean, last night's the kind of game that the Mets would be looking for. Jacob deGrom goes 6 or 7 innings, and then you really just use a couple relievers, Adam Ottavino, Edwin Diaz, and the Mets are as positioned as anybody, to take the National League based on their pitching strictly.
Uh, you and I have both been out at Citi Field quite a bit recently. We had Old Timers Day. Obviously, the Dodgers series has been very exciting. I mean, just the energy at Citi Field, particularly for a regular season game series, what have you, it's just kind of been unmatched. Going back to the 2015 playoffs, it's just a fun time to be at Citi Field.
It shows that the passion of Mets fans is so strong that if the Mets put together a winning product, people are going to show up. It's kind of like Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. If you build a contending team, the Mets fans will come out in droves at Citi Field. And I mean, yes, it was the Dodgers, so it's just a very competitive game and an important series. But to sell out the way they did on a Wednesday night, like that just shows the passion that Mets fans have. And they're going to keep that going here for the rest of the month and, hopefully deep into October.
So, like we mentioned, today, September 1st, and what that traditionally has meant in baseball, September call-ups, and in the past, that meant rosters expanding up to 40. Now, with change in rules, you can only go up to 28, which is still helpful for teams to either add an extra bullpen arm or an extra bat off the bench, whether that's a defensive replacement or a specialty, left-handed or right-handed hitter. Mets did announce their two moves. They're calling up Adonis Medina and Devin Marrero, who we saw earlier this season briefly on that road trip when the Mets needed a bunch of injury fill-ins. He was removed from the 40-man roster. Now he's back. Connor Gray was designated for assignment. Obviously, the big news regarding that is that the Mets passed over Marc Vientos, who was already on the 40-man roster for that spot. Obviously, Buck Showalter was asked about it and said that they value the defensive versatility of someone like Devin Marrero, especially with Luis Guillorme not going to be ready until next week at the earliest. So, what were your initial reactions to the Mets making a move to bring up someone like Marrero instead of Vientos, who's really been swinging a hot bat over the last really 2-3 months in Syracuse?
This is not intended to be a ding on Devin Marrero. I'm glad he got back to the major leagues and, a former first round pick that grinded, went back to independent ball to get back into organized baseball. And now he's at the major leagues. So I mean this as no disrespect to Devin Marrero, but Marc Vientos has to be on this team right now. When you're thinking about Luis Guillorme and the defensive versatility that he's going to bring, like you said, he could potentially be back as early as next week. if something were to happen to Francisco Lindor in the next couple days, I don't want Devin Marrero playing shortstop for the Mets. I would slide Eduardo Escobar to shortstop, kind of use that, time to just utilize him. And, we've talked about Marc Vientos on Mets Perspective all season, and I've talked about him on the Mets pod. Defense at third is not his strongest suit, but given, the need for thump in this lineup, Darren Ruff as the trade deadline acquisition to be the kind of lefty mashing part of the DH has done none of that. He has no home runs with the Mets. His OPS is barely over 500. So far it's been a tough go for Darren Ruff. But whether it's playing third base, whether it's kind of splitting some time with Ruff, or just being a power bat off the bench, I thought Marc Vientos, especially given his 40-man roster status, merited this call up for September. He earned it, like you said, over the last 2-3 months of performance. And, it's somewhat disappointing to me that didn't occur.
Yeah, I think when I look at it, it's just kind of confusing what the Mets view of Vientos is. You look at, when you think about how teams value minor leaguers, they'll tell you what they think about them based on how they promote them, whether that's from AA to AAA or from AAA to the majors, how they utilize them if they do get called up to the majors, if they're a bench player, if they're starting. I just don't really, I'm not really able to get a sense of what the Mets think of Marc Vientos. Obviously, he's been in the system for quite a while, dating back to Sandy Alderson's first tenure, but he's not exactly a Billy Epler guy. But like we said, they had the opportunity to call him up when JD Davis was struggling, in terms of that lefty masher corner infielder role. They didn't make a move then. Even, Davis having minor league options at the time, they could have made a quick swap and just kind of see what Vientos could have brought to the table. So they didn't do that. I figured at the time, okay, they're waiting for an opportunity for Vientos to kind of be a full-time player. Opportunity wasn't really there with Escobar playing third base full-time, earlier in the season. Then you figure, okay, well, if they're not really viewing him as one of their top chips going forward in the future, well, maybe they'll use him in a trade. He's clearly not going to bring back, a big piece and be the headliner, but you figure they could have used him in perhaps in place of JD Davis if that was how they wanted to approach that trade, or just, in terms of a bullpen piece, something like that. They didn't. They held him off. Billy Epler and Sandy have said multiple times that they have a group of minor league prospects that they did not want to move under 99% of circumstances when you're looking at moves to make at the deadline. So they held on to him, and that makes you think, okay, well, they actually value him as part of the future. And then an opportunity like this arises, and they don't make the move. So it's just confusing to kind of get a sense and a handle on what the Mets think of Marc Vientos, which, as an outsider, you look at the performance, you look at how well he's hitting against lefties. His numbers are solid against righties. They're otherworldly against lefties, both in terms of power and hitting for average and his strikeout rate. So it's just kind of confusing to me, at least, what the Mets view for Marc Vientos long term. And I guess for you, Joe, taking all of this into account, what is his future in the organization, maybe even going down to next year and beyond?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thought. What do the Mets think of Marc Vientos? Like you said, they passed him up. I was talking in early mid-July, they should be giving Vientos a 2-3 week look before the deadline to see if they could avoid trading, 4 players to get, like they ended up doing, trading 4 players to get half of a DH essentially. Then they didn't do that. So I was like, okay, they want to ride the veteran. I get it. You'll see Vientos in September. Now that also didn't occur. And they didn't want to trade him at the deadline, which it seems like he was in that group that Sandy Alderson and Billy Epler had implied that they were looking to keep. So they wanted to keep him in the organization. They didn't want to trade him, but they don't want to call him up either. So it's kind of a shrug emoji, like, what's the deal with Marc Vientos? And I am wondering, I don't have any inside information on this specifically, but I have to wonder if he's someone that they're planning on shopping in the offseason when, we don't know what the needs of this team will be. Jacob deGrom's a free agent. Chris Bassett's a free agent. Taijuan Walker and Carlos Carrasco could be free agents. Edwin Diaz, basically the whole bullpen. Brandon Nimmo. So there's a lot of things that are going to need to be addressed. So I wonder if they thought, don't trade Vientos for a rental piece to just help win in 2022, because we have a lot of work to do in the offseason. And maybe he's going to be more valuable as a trade chip in the winter, with potentially some big names coming available. You wonder if the plan is for Vientos to be a part of something like that. But it's really hard, like you said, to pinpoint what exactly the Mets think about Marc Vientos at this point.
Yeah, and just on the trade front, you wonder how much value he holds coming into the offseason. As when you look at him and Ronnie Mauricio are probably the two guys who have dropped in value over which is weird to say based on Vientos's offensive numbers, but you look at his defense and you look at what the Mets potentially think of their own player. Other teams are clearly aware of that, and you just kind of wonder what he could potentially bring back. Certainly won't be a centerpiece to a big deal, but it will be interesting. Speaking of third base prospects, let's talk a little bit about Brettbaity. Obviously, when we first were planning to plan our rundown for the show, we were going to talk about Brettbaity and his outlook going forward through the rest of the season. Obviously, now we know he won't be playing the rest of the regular season, at least. He was diagnosed with a torn UCL. Like, I did not know you had a UCL in your thumb. When I first saw that, I thought there was something wrong with his elbow. But he has a torn UCL ligament in his thumb. He's going to have surgery. I think they said 5 to 6 weeks is the approximate timeline on that, which is good news potentially looking into the postseason. He could be available, perhaps if the Mets make it to the NLCS and beyond. So I guess we can kind of do a look back on the brief major league tenure of Brettbaity. This was another situation where the Mets had an opportunity and an opening with the injuries on that road trip to Atlanta and DC. They called up Brettbaity. He was playing pretty much every day at third base, and after the home run in his first plate appearance, the baseline numbers weren't quite there, but I think some underlying things that you could be really happy about with what you saw from Beatty.
Yeah, I came away perfectly, impressed with what Brettbaity brought to the table. Like you said, the baseline stats don't look great, but I saw a guy that didn't really look overmatched really at any time. He didn't look out of place when he was up, even against high-level left-handed relievers, which bring a lot of trouble to left-hand hitters at the big league level. And he was hitting the ball hard very often. So you saw what we saw in the minors, hit the ball hard. Looked like he had a plan at the plate. He was willing to take some pitches. He wasn't drastically chasing too much. So to me, it was a good first impression for a young guy that's adjusting to the major leagues after, less than a week of AAA time. He was called up to AAA and then called up to the bigs seemingly almost right away. So it was perfectly fine. And, it's unfortunate because I thought he had the opportunity here over the next week or two to solidify himself as the primary third baseman going into the stretch run and into the potentially the playoffs here for a real contender. And at this point, it's hard to imagine the Mets bringing him back, barring another injury for the postseason. At this point, you would think they would ride the Luis Guillorme, Eduardo Escobar duo once Guillorme works his way back. But yeah, no, overall, I thought Beatty looked fine. And I think we should be very optimistic for what he can be in 2023.
Yeah, just on a couple points that you made, I think it was going to be interesting when Guillorme was ready to return, what they were going to do with Beatty on the roster. I mean, you usually look at prospects of his caliber, kind of when they come up, they're up for good. But he was kind of coming up because of a short window of an opportunity, and his play wasn't exactly going to force their hand to keep him over someone else. But it would have been interesting, and obviously we won't know the answer to that question. And then just on what he's shown, like you said, the power and the knowledge of the strike zone were the two big things that kind of highlight his offensive profile. And we saw the exit velocities were up there, even if they were, ground outs or line drives at an infielder. The launch angle and spray angle can be worked on. You can't really teach a guy who's hitting balls 108, 110 miles an hour. I want to say that his highest was something like 113, if I vaguely recall something like that. So raw power clearly there. And then his knowledge of the strike zone. I was kind of tracking game by game, following how his plate discipline numbers were developing, and for his first like six or seven games, about 5, 6, 7 games, he hadn't swung and missed at a pitch in the strike zone. Then once you got to that Yankees 2-game Yankees series, he kind of started to get blown past in the strike zone. But at least those first 2 series he played, he did not swing and miss at a pitch in the strike zone. So he was he limited chase, putting the bat on the ball, and these are really things that I guess maybe you can train with specific workouts, but it helps when a guy intrinsically has those tools. And when you look at the numbers, like I'm looking at his zone contact rate right now is right up there with Luis Guillorme in terms of Mets this season. And when you think of Mets who can just innately make contact with the ball, Guillorme is that guy. When you think about chase rates, he's right up there with Guillorme again. And someone like Dan Vogelbach, who was brought in a kind of similar skill set, power and knowledge of the strike zone. So yeah, impressive from Beatty. I think, and some people have mentioned it. His defense was not terrible, but you could tell that he was getting adjusted to the speed of the game, and kind of knowing what you're going to do with the ball when it comes to you is a lot tougher when there's 30,000 fans in a stadium, and you're not used to looking up and seeing a third deck in a stadium. Like that's a real thing that it takes time for guys to adjust to. So looking forward 2023, Eduardo Escobar is still under contract for next year. Luis Guillorme obviously is still an arbitration eligible player. I mean, do you think that the third base job is something that's attainable for him coming out of spring training on opening day?
I absolutely do, but I think it'll be a competition of sorts in spring training, I would imagine, but I don't see why not. I mean, he got called up. He, granted it was due to some injuries, and like everything you point out was valid, that he looked, like he fit in the major leagues. So I see no reason why, with another offseason of work, a spring training where maybe he gets more routine at bats with the big league club, I think he could be the primary third baseman on opening day. And ultimately the Mets are going to be trying to compete this year, next year, and every year going forward. So you're going to want to be deep. So if that means Eduardo Escobar's primary role is, substituting against some tough lefties and, filling in at second, filling in at short, and Guillorme's kind of that utility infielder that they envisioned him being kind of coming into this season, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I think Beatty could certainly compete to be the primary third baseman on opening day. If not opening day, shortly thereafter, I think you'll be talking about Beatty as a primary player for this team.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to another topic and another player that we have talked about ad nauseum this year, and for good reason. And that's Francisco Alvarez, who has kind of been on the shelf for the last week and a half or so. And we finally got an update just before we came on the air. And I want to make sure I get the wording right on this, because it was a very medical phrase statement. So Alvarez was in New York today, and Buck Showalter had mentioned that he was, they were waiting results. And the official statement that after undergoing diagnostic imaging, Francisco has been diagnosed with a loose body in his right ankle. He will receive an injection today at the hospital for special surgery. Tentative plan is for him to resume baseball activities in 3 to 4 days. His return to play will be dictated by his response to the injection and baseball activities. So about what you would expect for a medical update. But it's interesting just because there was the potential that he was going to need surgery and end his season completely. And now it seems like the door is being left open for a return, perhaps, within the next week or so. So obviously an interesting season for Francisco Alvarez. Absolutely lit the world on fire in Double-A, and then kind of struggled upon his promotion to Triple-A. But when you look at how Mets catchers have performed offensively this year as a whole, you figure that it's possible that he could have been in the conversation for a call up. So obviously the medical stuff is throwing a wrench in that. But what did you think the odds were that we would have seen Alvarez perhaps at this September 1st call up deadline?
I didn't expect to see him, even if this ankle situation didn't come about. And, I don't know what a loose body necessarily is. It weirds me out. I don't know why there's loose bodies hanging around ligaments, but I'm certainly not a doctor. And yeah, so, but all things considered, it seems like he's going to be largely okay. Like you said, there was some fear of surgery. He may not play again this season. I imagine that's still a possibility given kind of just how much time is left in the AAA season. It wouldn't be shocking if he didn't play. But yeah, I don't think he warranted the call up. That's what it comes down to for me. James McCann, Tomas Nido, Michael Perez, those guys who have been the primary catchers here, we know they have not performed offensively. That's not really breaking news to anybody watching this. But when you take a guy like Alvarez, 20 years old, catcher, still needs work defensively, he didn't hit his way to the major leagues, right? You could have talked about, all right, well, we'll figure out the defense. We'll make it work. Maybe he only part-time catches and does some DH work like that. But if that's the case, you want him kind of performing like Marc Vientos performed. And the reality is Alvarez is hitting sub 200 in AAA, which to me is not a massive deal for when you think about his long-term outlook. He's a 20-year-old catcher. Most 20-year-old catchers will be playing for the St. Lucie Mets, not the Syracuse Mets. So it's a credit to Alvarez and how special he is as a talent that he's able to be where he is. But it is a results-driven business largely, and I don't think he warranted that call up if he did not get injured. So yeah, I don't think I would have called him up, but yeah, it's definitely an interesting year for him. Like you said, dominated AA, struggled in AAA, then went on a little kind of mini hot streak in AAA where it seemed like he figured it out and then kind of went back down. So he's a guy that wouldn't have touched this year, but I'd be looking at as a candidate to compete for a job, in spring training 2023, because I believe he needs to be added to the 40-man roster anyway for the Rule 5 draft. And certainly he's a guy that should be catching games for the Mets sometime in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, his trajectory always felt like it was a play for 2023. I mean, he was going to have to do something absolutely ridiculous. The Mets were going to have to lose like 3 catchers to injury before you even considered it, which is not a slight on him at all. I mean, he's already, like you said, exceeded the timeline that I mean was set for him. When you even think back to last year when we talked to Jeremy Barnes, who was the farm director last year, about what he was expecting for him, and I think we talked to him when he was in St. Lucie for a month, and he was kind of methodically laying it out, and he's blown past that, and I don't think the Mets were expecting him to even be a AAA at this point, maybe coming into the season. So like you said, potentially a 2023 play. I think it could end up a similar situation to what we saw with Pete Alonso in 2019. He was known as Peter then. But in terms of a guy that is going to have the opportunity to play his way into a spot where you just can't really make a good reason to deny him that opportunity. I don't know if Billy Epler's as aggressive in that sense as Brody Van Wagenen was, but it's going to be interesting to see, and I think a full off season for him to train with that knowledge and that goal in mind. Obviously, he had said he wanted to make the major this year, but knowing that it's a little more attainable now going into next season should be fun to watch. So we have a viewer question to get to, and Joe, I think you're gonna like this one a little bit. We have this one coming from Webb's Love 1122. Are you surprised that Jet Williams didn't crack MLB's top 100 prospects list?
No, I'm not surprised. Jet Williams is my guy. I said this on Mets Perspective. I've written about it on SNY.TV. I've talked about it on the Mets pod. He was my personal favorite player in the draft, not ranked as such on my big board. I think I had him in the mid-teens. I think he's a guy that has top 100 upside, and it wouldn't shock me if he's in future top 100 lists. But I don't think there's only so many guys from a specific draft class that make the initial top 100. And Kevin Parada is a guy that warranted it, given, he was a guy that I had on the top 5 of my board. And I mean, frankly, when I was going into draft day, I assumed his floor was the Nationals at 5. And he just kept going. And, credit to the Mets for pulling the trigger. Love Jet. I think he has massive upside. He performed really well in the Florida Complex League and in that season as they made the playoffs. He was a big part of that, stealing bases, showing contact ability, playing pretty good shortstop defense from what I was told. So I think he's as advertised, and he's a prospect that I'm very excited to follow in 2023.
Yeah. And, speaking for myself as someone who is not as in touch with the prospects pre-draft as you are, I knew the name. I didn't know too much about him other than his kind of general skill set. And, just from the limited data and footage that we've seen of him since he's joined the organization, it's exciting as a kind of a spark plug guy who can, do pretty much everything at least solid, if not better than average, and even power from someone at his size is pretty cool to see. Assuming that the question we were asked is referring to the MLB pipeline rankings, it's worth noting that they did put him, or the pipeline staff did put him at number 5, right behind Alex Ramirez and ahead of Ronnie Mauricio and Marc Vientos, and Ramirez is among the 4 that did make the top 100 from this organization. So if that were to, the slide down as guys graduate were to continue, Jet Williams would make the top 100 just on account of being right behind Ramirez. So he's there, he's in the general area and conversation. And I think, as he gets into full season ball is probably when guys like him start to be seen by more people, and he can improve his stock with a full season next year. But certainly a lot to be excited for with him as an athletic up the middle guy that can hit quite a bit. So lots to be excited about when you look at the guys coming out of the draft this year, and we've talked about them in the past. So yeah, I think that'll do it for us here on another edition of Mets Prospective Live. Thanks to everyone for tuning in on SNY's social channels, and we'll look forward to talking to you guys soon again on another episode of Mets Prospective and on social media as well. He's at PSL to Flushing. I'm at Jacob_Resnick. So for Joe and everyone behind the scenes, I'm Jacob Resnick. We'll see you next time on Mets Prospective.